The state Supreme Court on dollars for districts, no. A circuit judge to the Supreme Court on capital cases, yes. The Arkansas economy as measured by the Arkansas Treasury, and after Las Vegas, has the political climate in Arkansas and America changed? Arkansas Week, next.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week, and we're going to begin tonight with what has for decades been a sore spot in Arkansas governance. And to talk about it tonight, Sarah Whites-Kodachek from Arkansas Public Media, Wesley Brown, reporter and columnist for Talk Business and Politics, and syndicated columnist Steve Bronner. And thanks to everybody for coming in. Once again, I think for the third time, the Arkansas Supreme Court, Steve, has weighed in on and been summoned to rule on the General Improvement Fund and how those funds have been employed, deployed, allocated, spent.
I guess the question now is this going to be the last time? Because each time there's been a workaround.
Yeah.
This latest way was for the money to kind of be funneled to these planning districts, 8 of them, and then from there it went to these different projects, and it's pretty clear that the legislators basically directed where the money went. $50 million since 2013, according to exhaustive research by the Democrat-Gazette. And yesterday, the Supreme Court, Arkansas Supreme Court, ruled that you can't do this, that the Constitution requires the money to go to a specific purpose. Mm-hmm. So this has been really this past session, no General Improvement Fund money was dispersed. It is clearly a political football. 2 legislators one of them has already pled guilty to taking a kickback. Another one is on trial for that, and there are rumors that more could be in trouble. So now, right now, it's a political football that no one wants to kick. The question is, will there be another way in the future for all that money to be kind of to find its way where the legislators want it in the future?
We probably ought to back up just for a second anyway. I suspect most of our audience knows exactly what the General Improvement Fund is, but we probably ought to back up and explain it, that it is potentially a multi-million-dollar pool of money. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small, that accumulates at the end of a fiscal year.
Yeah, it's what we call the leftover from general funds, and it's and these will go to pet projects. In the federal terms, people know it as pork. Generally, and these go to pet projects. It's kind of the business equivalent of the check signing, where the legislators, you get this pool of money, and then they go to their community and say, and they have their name written on the bottom of the check and say, I helped bring this amount of dollars to this local community, whether it's for fire trucks or local projects. But in this example, but in the past, as Steve has noted, they've always been kind of rife with just the appearance of impropriety because of the fact that you have the potential for bribery, potential for this money coming from a legislator to these nonprofits or these groups in these local communities. And as you've seen, it's proved the point. As Steve said, I don't think during the Hutchinson administration that we're going to see gifts, the GIFs anymore, because Hutchinson has kind of mandated this is rife with the fraud and potential corruption. So I don't think you're going to see it during the time that he's governor. But as Steve said, legislators have a way of working around that, and they've done it 3 times in the past.
Well, even if every cent went to the angels, so to speak, the idea of an individual legislator with no, with no advice and consent from colleague outside the normal appropriations process, being able to spend, to dedicate funds to any particular project that he or she elected to, ran against the grain of what many thought was good government. I can recall at a time in the fat years of the 1990s, I think, when each member of the Senate was in line to get $1 million to distribute as he or she saw fit.
Yeah. In 2015, I think that number was for the House it was 75,000. For the Senate it was about 300,000. I think it was 280,000. But that's still a nice a bit of money. And as you said, in the past, there's been kind of a traditional rule that all state funds have a kind of state-specific need, but these funds tend to go to places where nobody knows where it goes. And of course, as Steve noted, the issue up in Northwest Arkansas with the Bible College is no one. I think 10 lawmakers gave to that school, and this school is not well known. So it's a situation that I think we're going to see more situations with this gift money as reporters tend to go and look at those campaign reports and see where all this money is going to. I think you're going to see more of this come out. Even
members of the General Assembly who were publicly anyway opposed to the General Improvement Fund, and there were several. Well, it's there. I can't resist, even as they criticized it. Not all, but some. Have we seen the end of it now?
Well,
you touched on it, Steve, earlier.
Temporarily, yes. Just as right now in Congress, there's a ban on pork barrel projects nationally too. But we're talking about billions of dollars in the state government and trillions of dollars in the federal government. And legislators hear from constituents. Not all this money was wasted. It went to local fire departments and libraries and boys and girls clubs and things like that. So for a while, we won't see any gift money, but eventually legislators will figure out a way to reward either good agencies or reward good supporters, and we'll probably be back here again in some other form in the future.
And I think the reason why you might see that is as the economy improves and as the revenue continues to, and you see this during times when the revenue improves quite a bit, and then the legislature will go back in, and I guarantee they'll, like you said, somebody will create a bill that'll work around that, or some kind of scheme that'll work around that. And you'll see that, especially as the economy improves, the revenue coffers grow, you'll see them go back at that.
Yeah, well, hopefully it'll grow. And Steve touched on this, and not to put too fine a point on it, but Steve mentioned that the General Assembly has done 2 previous workarounds after 2 earlier Supreme Court decisions that said, no, you can't do this. The latest incarnation of GIF spending was to filter, anyway, the grants through these regional planning districts with the explicit, if not explicitly, certainly implicit message that this money is to be spent on this project. And nobody denied it.
Yeah, and you look at the court filings, and Mike Wilson, the former legislator who brought this lawsuit, specifically said, they didn't even, he noted in one case where they didn't even pretend to vote for it. They held these board meetings and they basically unanimously voted on these potential projects where these grants were to go to, and there was no accounting for this. So yes, and I think there are going to be a lot of questions about these 8 planning districts too. They're made of very influential local people like mayors and county judges. So there's going to be a lot of questions about their involvement in this process too.
Also, before the Arkansas Supreme Court, there was an action filed this week by the Honorable Wendell Griffen, Circuit Judge of the 6th Circuit, who had previously been banned or suspended by the Arkansas Supreme Court from capital cases. And His Honor Judge Griffen challenged that in court today.
Yeah, he filed a lawsuit. It was against the
Speaking
Supreme,
of controversy.
Yeah, he filed a lawsuit against the Supreme Court in federal court, U.S. District Court, and basically he said that when they prevented him from overseeing cases involving the death penalty, execution, or related, that they really got into, they violated his First and 14th Amendment rights and his rights to the religious freedom in Arkansas. And he basically said that and he also pointed out that this was racially motivated. He said there was, in the court filing, he said there was racial animus involved in this. And he noted that several white judges have not received this kind of punishment by the Ethics Commission or the Judicial Ethics Commission or the state high court. So,
well, remember back to last spring, Judge Griffen was ruled on this case that McKesson brought about the use of its drug in the planned execution, and ruled against the use, and then staged a protest outside the governor's mansion where he laid on a gurney in the position that Jesus...
A chaise lounge, I think you should say. It looks strikingly like a gurney. But,
So this is why the Supreme Court took all of the execution cases out of his court. He had, for years, been ruling on the secrecy laws and various other issues. It strikes me as an interesting use of the Religious Freedom Act that Arkansas, the controversial act that Arkansas passed a few years ago, around the time that discrimination against LGBT people was pitted against religious rights. So now being used to justify his expression of his religious beliefs as a judge.
And it should be noted, he's also a Baptist preacher, and he was saying that in the court filing, he basically said that he was expressing his views as a follower of Jesus Christ and as a Baptist preacher. So, and he said it didn't really involve his duties as a judge, but the court and the Judicial Commission have basically come in and said, well, you have certain, as a justice or circuit court judge, you have certain, people view you a certain way. So I think it's going to be a long case. It's going to be drawn out because there's other issues involved in this. The state legislature has also said they're going to, if this moves forward, they might move forward in impeachment proceedings against Judge Griffen also.
just the latest chapter in Judge Griffen's willingness to assert what he contends are his First Amendment rights to free speech, even though he's wearing a judicial robe. Although he might not be wearing it on the intersection of University and Asher, but...
And he said that the Gurney incident, that he was not protesting the death penalty, that he was actually, that was part of a pre-planned protest, but there were death penalty opponents holding signs in the same general area, at the same protest. So he said, he now says that was not a death penalty protest.
He's also said that he thinks it's immoral but not illegal, and that he can make that distinction. He's in the past spoken out about police use of force, and he's been on a citizens commission reviewing police officers. So in past years, that's been one of his sort of areas of activism.
And I think the federal court case is going to be a referendum on these racial issues that he's spoken about in the public, because if you look at the court filing, he specifically draws out that Mike Maggio, the federal judge here in Conway County that was prosecuted for bribery, didn't get these kinds of punishments from the state high court, and other circuit court judges white circuit court judges have had done things that violate their judicial canons, and they did not receive the kind of punishment. He can't see these cases for the rest of his term, meaning until he's no longer a judge.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know if this applies, but there was sort of an interesting legal principle that came up with the Little Rock School District case alleging racial discrimination, that they would have had to prove an intent to discriminate, and that can be really difficult to do, to prove that there was actually a malicious racially discriminatory purpose from public officials. So I don't know if that's the same legal standard, but it could be challenging to meet that standard.
And this is not the first time that we would have had an Arkansas judge be known for being outspoken about issues. And in Alabama, just elected a Supreme Court ex-Supreme Court justice to the U.S. Senate. So the idea that judges and justices are always silent and objective, while it may be an ideal, it hasn't been the political reality.
Okay, the realities of economic growth. Wesley touched on it a second ago. We'll start with the September revenue report.
Yeah, in September we had net general revenues came in about 518 million, or just slightly 3.3 million above the forecast for the year. For the first 3 months of the year, we're about at 1.4 billion, or 2.2 million, or really flat over the forecast. But it just shows that so far in fiscal 2008, which began in July 1st, the state economy is just moving gradually along. There's nothing outstanding issues. We got low unemployment. We've got a good job growth, but still not anything that says, oh, we've got a boon or our economy is about to take off. It's just moving and gradually along. So.
Government and business planners tend to prefer it that way.
Yeah,
some stability rather than.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has happened over the last 3 or 4 years is that you made 3, 4 months of great growth, and then then it backs up and you lose everything. So we're into a period, especially with stable employment and just in the GDP report. I think the U.S. economy is about 2.1% annually. So we're just gradually moving along, nothing surprising out there. But still, if in the stock market is moving along pretty well. So everything's doing pretty well. It's nothing to brag about, but nothing that is crucial.
Well, I was going to ask you, the phrase irrational exuberance was used some years ago, and all the indices just keep going up like Scott. We've got North Korea cooking, we've got the domestic policies, Iran, and the stock market keeps going.
Yeah, everybody thought that the hurricanes, when they hit, that there was going to be a blip in the stock market from that. Really hasn't been, and as you said, even the threat of war in the past has caused the stock market to bridle itself, but it hasn't. The stock market is really growing. There's some predictions that it will continue to hit new highs over the next 3 or 4 years. Earnings for corporate earnings are well above a year ago, and we got the third quarter earnings that are start coming in next week with the banks, and we're going to see really great growth. So I think and our president is championing that. And one of the interesting things you're seeing in Arkansas, one sector that was losing jobs, manufacturing, has grown over the last year. Have seen thousands of manufacturing jobs added, and people thought just because of automation and technology that those jobs would not come back, but you're starting to see some of those jobs come back too.
Well, we have Christmas retail just around the corner, and we also have in Arkansas, we don't have the jobless stats until, until next week. In Arkansas, we had just 1/10%, I think, increase in the jobless rate, but then again, more people were coming in. The state planners, the Chamber of Commerce, the corporate community, is it making any predictions for Arkansas for this final quarter of the calendar year?
Yeah, I think you're going to see some. I've seen Walmart and some of the job dealers who both are based in Arkansas said they're going to try to hire a little bit more for the upcoming holiday seasons, and some of the consumer spending models have said that they're going to be a slight uptick in spending during the holiday period as it is normal, but people are still kind of the consumer are really confident, but they're still cautious. And that's based on the fact of the instability in the White House, that people are concerned that something may happen, so they're holding their money close to their vest. So consumers' confidence is good, but consumer spending is kind of guarded right now.
We will continue to watch Las Vegas as it may affect public policy in America. Steve, guys, anyone? We had the National Rifle in the wake of Las Vegas, the horror there. We had the National Rifle Association actually lend its support to a ban, potential ban anyway, on these bump stocks, which can, everyone knows about them, I mean, lethal adaptation of a firearm anyway. And then come to find out the NRA kind of wants something in return too.
Well, we've heard
But
from,
anyway, how does that change the climate, or does Las Vegas have much impact here?
we have heard from Tom Cotton that he would be open to supporting this restriction. Not much out of the other congressional representatives from Arkansas, but it is a departure from the reactions from the Republican Party in Congress after mass shootings in the past decade, that there's been a stiff resistance against making any kind of restrictions.
And of
Leadership.
course, what the NRA has said is that they're open to looking at executive regulations. They have not said we want legislative relief. They have not said we want a ban or anything like that. So it would all depend on what the Trump administration would do, which the Trump administration has said we might look at something. Now, very, very vaguely. It's hard to see there being massive legislation occurring because we don't do massive legislation anymore on very rare occasions. And Arkansas's congressional delegation is very, very pro-NRA. It came out this week from the New York Times that French Hill in the 2nd District has received more money than anybody else in Congress from the NRA over the course of his career, which is kind of a surprise because Representative Hill doesn't come across as being the biggest. Other issues that would seem to have been more along his lines than that one. I'm not saying he's not pro-gun, but that's not his. He has not. That was a little bit of a surprise. And Senator Cotton was one of the top-ranking senators. So, a lot of support in Arkansas for the NRA, and lots of money coming into Arkansas from the NRA.
Yeah, and I don't see. I think the other congressional delegation is going to kind of hold back, and they're not going to go out on a limb and announce that they will support some legislation unless the NRA comes out and said we support this or we support that. We're not going to see that. And as Steve said, there's not going to be any legislation. There's basically going to probably be support for executive order to change an ATF rule that allow these bump stocks on AK-15s, AR-15s, and to make them automatic weapons. So you may see some movement in that, but as far as legislation, I don't think we're going to see that. And as far as Arkansas legislature, you still see that strong support for don't mess with the Second Amendment.
Prefer that nothing even be introduced.
Right, exactly.
Don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the state is in the process of formulating this class for an advanced permit for concealed carry for campus. So that's taken effect, but the permit's not out yet. The goal is to find a way to train lay people to actually respond effectively in these scenarios and not, accidentally hit the wrong person, not be mistaken for the shooter. So it's an 8-hour class that, tackling those issues.
What the NRA, you mentioned, the NRA, what they're after is reciprocity, meaning if you have a license in this state, then you have a license in all other states.
On to, it's still with Washington and Arkansas. The gentleman from Arkansas, Senator Cotton, seems to be a frequent guest at White House dinners now. He apparently has Mr. Trump's ear. Anyway, we are told and Mr. Cotton acknowledged, arguing early, as he has, arguing with to Mr. Trump that he should back away from the Iran deal, which in fact Mr. Trump indicated he was doing, taking that first tentative step anyway.
Yeah,
got a high profile, Mr. Cotton.
Yeah. He had a high profile with the immigration policy with the White House, and now with this Iran deal, President Trump announced earlier this week that he's going, probably next week sometime, he's going to announce he's going to basically throw the Iran deal back to Congress and give them 60 days to take another look at it. And I don't really think the Congress has the stomach to do this, but Senator Cotton, who's more hardline, wants to basically overhaul anything that the Obama administration did in their Iran deal. So we'll see. I think him or someone like Tom Cruise would have to be the person to introduce that legislation, because I don't think a lot of other senators in Congress are interested in revisiting that issue again, because it took up a great deal of time during the Obama administration.
Yeah, and interestingly, Mr. Cotton is arguing against the advice of Mr. Trump's own defense secretary, his own Secretary of State, and I think as well his Chief of Staff, General Kelly.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff also, all at least indicate that the deal is working, or at least would need to be fixed, versus being dumped entirely. But in this case, the president would trump all of those, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended. And it appears that for the signals he's sending, that President Trump and Senator Cotton are on the same page, and Secretary of State, Defense, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff can be on the other side.
We got a final word?
One difficulty is that Iran has actually seemingly been meeting the requirements of the deal. Mm-hmm. So what will the fallout be if the U.S. pulls out without cause?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We'll leave it there because we're out of time. Thanks to everyone for coming in. As always, we thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.